So why don't I start by introducing our intrepid host. Today we've got Doug Gain, who's the VP of the Business Applications Group at one of our star partners, Adept Dynamics. They're doing some really cool and innovative stuff with web portals, among many other things. So today we're going to hear some of what's going on the cutting edge with the Power Platform. My name's Colin Mayhew. I'm with Sherweb as the Dynamics and Power Platform guy. Many of you may have met me before, but if you haven't, I would love to make your acquaintance if you're interested in learning more about the whole business application side of the Microsoft stack. So keep me in mind. Today's agenda, as you can imagine, we're going to learn a little bit about Adept Dynamics and the cool work they're doing. We're going to dive deep into web portals, the use cases, and how Microsoft's making it really easy to deploy web portals and start solving customer problems without a bunch of custom code. So not just what it is, how to use it, but also how to weave it into your business and use it to make some more money, which we're always looking for. Did I skip a page? Okay. Anyway, so Doug, I'll let you take it away. But we'll start off with the definition. Anything you'd like to add?
No, I appreciate it. I'm excited to get going. We have a lot of material to cover, and want to make sure I'm making the most of it. So
fabulous.
All right, off we go. So first and foremost, I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today about web portals. It's something I'm really passionate about, as you'll see here shortly, and I hope by the end of this you will be too. But as Colin just walked through, that's a lot of material to cover in that agenda. Many of those could have been their own presentation in itself. And so kind of by design, I'm going to be moving quickly, trying to get the key points, communicate as much of the material as possible. Colin, as mentioned, can help distribute the slides afterwards so you can kind of read in more detail. But also, please drop your questions so that way I can make sure that I'm getting you the information that matters in exchange for you taking an hour to spend with us today. And you don't feel like you dialed in for an hour and I didn't give you the one piece that you really needed answered. So, Colin, if you could help me make sure we're answering those questions as we go.
By all means, yeah. Use the question tab, but we will make sure that those get answered in the flow of the conversation. And if something maybe is better to wait till the end, we're going to leave time at the end for Q&A as well. So if you get your question, and we'll make sure that we address it.
That sounds great. Without further ado, who we are. Adept Dynamics, at our core, we're a project service company. This may diverge a bit from some of the other MSP used today. We're not focused on providing licensing so much as maintaining client relationships through balancing the business and technology aspects of being a business technology consultancy. To make sure we really understand our clients' business and their business practices, more importantly, so we can help them improve their process. And what that looks like kind of in practice is making sure that they have a deep trust in our kind of overall view of what's available in the marketplace to kind of meet their needs. And we can kind of help advise them on what's going to work with their business model. So really being those trusted subject matter experts, we feel we've done well when we're always the first one at the top of their mind when they run into any kind of technology question. It's, hey, Doug, you have a few minutes. I know this isn't what you typically do for us, but we wanted your opinion on how to best solve X or do Y. Or here's an issue. We don't even know where to start. That's what we work for here at Adept Dynamics, and it's kind of the goal of every one of our projects is to have that enduring partner relationship through developing quality solutions that meet those needs, but also just a strong trust and partnership between ourselves and our customers. Why we're different? That's a little bit more nuanced. If you'd like to go to the next slide, thank you. We really put that web portals at the front of our vision in action. So through our robust requirements gathering phase, which I'll elaborate a little more on it We really do leverage the diverse nature of our company, and that's diverse both in terms of our technology specializations. We don't seek a lot of overlap of a lot of the same consultants providing the same service. We really do have a diverse team, but experts in their very narrow capability that we could then work with a client to kind of build the right, project team or task force almost, that's kind of calibrated to meet our clients' specific needs. Relevant today, that ties us into web portals. And so as you'll see on the next slide, that's where I think why Colin and Sherweb asked us to give this presentation today is because web portals have been one of those technologies that more and more is finding its way into projects that didn't originally envision them. We've consistently used portals to provide value to our clients, which wouldn't have been possible through other means of extending a CRM. And we believe portals is going to continue to grow as a part of our core competencies moving forward. Who I am, I'm Douglas Gain, the Vice President of Business Applications Group here at Adept Dynamics, certified Power Platform Solutions Architect, and you probably guessed I have hands-on experience building portals, initially through Power Apps portals and now through the new Power Pages. My background is in the military. I graduated West Point as an infantry officer before transferring to cyber electromagnetic warfare, and I've supported operations on the ground in Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Why you're here, though, now we've kind of gotten that out of the way, is web portals. So what are web portals? Simply, at their core, they're just a website that allows either anonymous or authenticated users to interact with your database through a user interface, as opposed to programmatically through a web API or through like a licensed seat in your Azure Active Directory, like what you're used to with like a CRM or even many Power BI dashboards. Users can be internal or external, which is a thing we'll touch on later in the presentation. But the key statistic I'd like you to take away from this slide is that 88% of customers expect businesses they interact with to have some sort of web presence and self-service portal. It's hard to get 88% of customers to agree on really anything in this day and age. And so it's really telling that that number is so high, and we expect that to drift higher as time continues to pass. And really, it's not hard to kind of contextualize the why that might be. Looking at my own life as a customer and end user, Columbus Waterworks is somewhere I've really kind of had some negative feelings with. They don't have a web portal. They have a website, and as soon as I need to do a simple account action, they tell me to please call this 1-800 number or submit an email to the following helpline to submit an account. I think we can all relate that it's a busy day. It was hard enough for me to, finally go and Google their website so I can go fix my account issue. And now that I've found out that it's a scavenger hunt, and that was just, step one, and their website's going to put steps 2 and 3 on my agenda, is something that's frustrating. And moving forward, you can kind of apply that to most customer interactions. And so what we're going to see is, if there's an opportunity for a customer to change from one provider to another, their ability to kind of self-service, get what they need 24 hours a day, et cetera, as we'll cover in this briefing, those are those key differentiators that are becoming more and more poignant from a customer point of view and less tolerable if companies aren't getting with the times as the perception may be.
I kind of think of it as getting yourself out of the way of your customers or your clients and end user stakeholders, whatever that may be for your company, getting out of their way and letting them do what they need to do without waiting for you to physically intervene.
Oh, that's exactly right. It's better from an efficiency point of view. It's better from a customer service point of view. It's not easy in all cases, as we all know. There's certain reasons companies push back. However, that's why we're here this afternoon. So at its core, and we've already kind of touched on it, so I'll move quickly through here. But there's 2 main takeaways. One is the shifting stakeholder expectations, and really this is kind of getting to our knowledge as technology partners. So no matter how deep our expertise may be in a specific area, it shakes client confidence when we can't speak intelligently about web portals. And this is going to be a trend that continues. As you saw, 88% is already pretty high. And there's going to be more and more times a customer who's never had an interest in a web presence, they're not a very forward-leaning tech company, is going to ask that question. Hey, Doug, I saw a competitor has this new snappy onboarding through their website. Can you help us do the same? And if I can't field those questions initially, it's going to shake their understanding. It's going to reveal that, like, okay, hey, I'm good at this tool, but I'm not a full-bodied partner across your technology platform. I'm a solution for a specific problem, and they're going to start to think maybe they need to look elsewhere for some of these opportunities. The second reason we need to care is really that it's about being able to talk the talk and understanding how portals can play in an implementation. So one side is about, can we talk the talk? Do we have that trust? And the second part is just, can we implement it to bring value? And then the next couple slides, this one here, it's touching on that competence. Really no change from what we already went over. Number two reason, customer success. This is that kind of the reason Microsoft elevated Power Pages from an add-on to Power Apps into its own core offering. So not knowing how and when a pain point can be solved through a portal presents the same inefficiency as when, we don't know when a Power BI dashboard or Canvas application might solve a customer need more efficiently than, kind of rebuilding Dataverse forms from the ground up. And so it's not a new issue as the platform's grown. It's just the newest kind of member of that family, as we'll get to. And reason number three, why this should matter is that user adoption in a well-planned portal is going to continue to become incredibly important. But it doesn't mean that all MSPs need to start hiring former PHP developers and suddenly get into the business of building websites and portals. Really what it does mean is that, we all need to have a playbook on how we handle customer requests that come in about portals, or how we message to a client that a portal may be a better solution to their requirements than what was originally assumed. Defining web portal technology. So now we get to where I think is the fun part of these presentations. And we already touched on what a web portal is, but simplifying it down, if a portal that's been deployed eliminates process bottlenecks, pushes resources to the channels where they're needed most, or what in the Army we'd say, moves resources to the point of friction, and it improves the stakeholders' digital interaction experience, I'm left not thinking, I hate my water company's website, I wish there was an alternative. I'm like, wow, I don't know why I built this small task into such a thing. It was actually very simple. If that's the customer's takeaway, then that was a well-designed web portal. All these hows, best practices, everything I'll talk about in this brief, if what you've put together checks these three boxes, you won, you did it. So there's different ways to kind of get there, but that's the so what we should be moving at. And to get there, this is just a breakdown of the different types of portals. So customer self-service portal, that's what I've already been kind of addressing, and it's often the number one use case that people think of is you have customers that have data in your database that interact with you, and this is allowing them to take different account actions, answer key questions without having to go through those individual users or employees. Colin, as you mentioned, this is getting out of the way of customers and their data, just to kind of make it efficient and raise customer satisfaction. But there's other types of portals. There's partner portals, and this is that kind of business-to-business relationship where you're working with other companies, and you'll send up a portal where you can kind of securely share, network, and collaborate information across your businesses without having to, have some way to merge tenants or guest access into your tenants. It's just an alternative that in specific uses can be a very simple, reliable, and effective way to kind of cross-partner coordinate without going to these more expensive, complicated, and difficult to kind of walk back solutions that are out there. Next, employee self-service portal. Big thing here is really licensing, especially in the Microsoft Power Platform. We often think of okay, well, employees need to have a D365 sales license so they can interact with this, or Power Apps. Especially with the licensing changes that have kind of accompanied Power Pages. more and more, we're going to see that there's situations where employees may be better served with an internal facing portal, even if it's leveraging that same Active Directory login, single sign-on. It's all possible, so they can access that those Dataverse records, do what they need to do without having a full Dynamics seat and license. Last, community portal. What this looks like is those kind of usually focused on more, customer to customer collaboration. And so where customer self-service is how they can interact with their own data and get support from you, community portal is how you can get your customers to interact with each other. And so that could be blogs, forum posts, chat functions internally. It's a way to easily kind of crowdsource or efficiently crowdsource feedback from your community. If your client has any interest in, what do our users feel, this could be a way to kind of merge marketing, customer feedback, and all these other mechanisms that are expensive and served through other tools. And it's just another add-on technology that can really kind of work by, with, and through those other solutions to kind of just increase customer satisfaction and your visibility at a relatively low cost and investment for that feedback. Last, portal from blank. This is just to point out a little bit as a joke that we have these kind of templates that you'll see in Power Pages or Power Apps portals that align with a lot of these kind of archetypes. They'll have the customer service. They have like schedule financial meetings with your bank in some of these other templates. We almost always go with the portal from blank, start from scratch, but pulling kind of capabilities in some blend of these kind of predefined, this is what a portal is, to build the right size portal with the right capabilities for our clients. It's rare, especially if a portal wasn't what you were hired to do, that a customer is going to need a very robust portal initially. And so oftentimes starting with a template can just, hugely increase that complexity of the project, and it'll kind of push back. It'll give your customers some concerns because the training requirements are so much higher. Going with portal from blank, building just the components you need, makes it very intuitive, very quick to pick up and train, and it builds their confidence that oftentimes we've seen portals are great follow-on customers because there's always another page that they can envision, another capability or function that can be moved out of their kind of normal routine into a portal. Okay, portal solutions. So this is where we're going to kind of continue kind of peeling it back and diving into it. And Colin, I'm going to really go out of my way to not linger too much. I have a habit, and anyone at Adept can tell you that if I could talk for 90 minutes on reporting or automation or any one of these next slides, I will. So please drop questions in the chat, but for the sake of your sanity, I'm going to try to move quickly. So when we say
we'll get our recruiter, and we can drill in if we have questions.
Love it. So there's three kind of main things that portals can do and roles they apply. Reporting is a huge one, and that's very much just kind of exposing your database information securely to your customers. It could be authenticated or not authenticated. What that means is anonymous. If anyone goes to your website, they can just immediately kind of see some of this information. They can see your case studies. They can see examples of work you've done, maybe a URL to a sandbox that you've put together for clients. And this allows them to interact with this data without having to schedule a number of calls, and it could make them more confident that you are the partner for them. And if that's how we could see and leverage this, you could imagine that there's infinite ways where database information should be shared externally. And I use that example because often when you see reporting, when you think of it, people are often thinking Power BI and like, how do you visualize this information? It really can just be, what database information do you have that your customer needs? And you are just a obstacle between them and that data. And so
yeah. Maybe it would be like, for instance, Doug, would it be if I'm, let's say I'm selling different kinds of coffee machines. Maybe it's like, hey, here are our top sellers of the week. Here they are ranked, and maybe some of that market information, like what's hot, what's exciting, what's on sale. That is that the sort of thing you picture?
That's absolutely right. And when you think about reporting in the context of the different types of portal, reporting takes different forms. So if it's a partner to partner, that's like, hey, the customer feedback we're receiving from customers, we're going to securely share that through an authenticated portal with our partner, our manufacturers, our providers, so that way we can kind of seamlessly share customer feedback to the point of friction where that can be solved and leveraged in a way that's very organic, takes low overhead to kind of maintain. And it really raises that satisfaction because there's fewer instances where customers feel blindsided, partners feel blindsided, employees feel that like, hey, you were out sick, you were my point of contact. Now I feel like I don't have access to my data that I'm paying you to provide. And so there's a number of situations where reporting is far beyond what people sometimes think of. And it's just, we really challenge people to think, where is this data living? Who needs to see it? And is it worth a full license? Is it worth the customer interaction? Like, how does it fit in your sales pipeline? And more people are going to see that portals are going to be viable options. Maybe not the optimal, but certainly part of that list of a way you can solve this problem.
Yeah, where do you want things to be easy? Where do you want to eliminate resistance? Very cool.
Exactly. Perfect. Automation. This is similar but distinct enough. We think it's important that people consider it. I do a lot of Power Automate development in our shop, and a lot of those automations are notifications, and it's usually there's an overwhelming amount of data in a database and actions happening, and people are interested in specific anomalies or situations. Or like, hey, if X happens, I need to do Y very quickly. And so we're putting together like Teams chatbots that, presents information and prompts user feedback. But what we're seeing more and more is those can be difficult and expensive and tedious to maintain because it's kind of like for every problem that pops up, we use the adage if all we are is a hammer, and we're really good at process automation and integrating with the Microsoft Office suite. We could solve pretty much any problem through creative use of those technologies. But what we started to realize is how many of these customer pain points are we just applying? Here's how we can solve that, instead of realizing like, oh, that's probably applicable to a number of different users in a number of similar situations. Maybe having a dashboard on a website that they could just log into, that provides just that information is going to be a easier to maintain method than trigger action flows routing. It's like you could change JavaScript, as many of you are probably familiar with, in a web portal with far less restrictions than what you have in the CRM in the system, and it really does simplify when client requirements change. Updating a portal page is usually going to be an easier handover, easier documentation, easier maintenance than updating Power Automate flows that are affecting forms, that are affecting, triggers and events that may have been custom scripted using plugins and some other tools. And we just time and time again are like, hey, could a website just solve this problem more simply? Last, customer relationship management. This is very closely aligned with what we've seen from previous in the slideshow, and we're talking about how you kind of source that feedback from your customers, and so kind of leveraging portals for your own use, but also is just it adds comfort to your client you're supporting when you add it as an option. For every 3 times we bring it up, it might get selected once, but customers are far more comfortable going for your automation or going for your Canvas app or your CRM adjustments if you've given them a menu of options and it's like, hey, we can solve that pain point, option A, option B, option C. And the more comfortable you can become kind of articulating the advantages and disadvantages of web portal for a given requirement, reporting, or automation, that customer's satisfaction goes up because they don't feel like you're shoehorning them towards a certain route, and any kind of preconceptions they have of you're trying to just jack up the price, or you're trying to, you don't want us to look at other vendors. It does make you look far more capable and fair and a partner for your client when you can give them a menu of options and say, hey, option A is what we do most often. That's what we recommend. It'll integrate seamlessly with your data. However, you do have, option B, which is a portal. And here's why you might want to look at that and what it'll do for you, and what that could look like. And so whether or not they choose it or not, people just love having options. No one likes just being told, like, here's what it is and here's what it costs. Even if the other options are untenable or impractical, being able to see what those options are implies a trust in a relationship, and it really kind of lets them feel like they're still in the driver's seat. So if they don't like what you've done, you can kind of open up that conversation, and often you'll find an option D that you hadn't envisioned based on their feedback on, here's why option C sounds interesting. And you're like, oh, well, I didn't really consider it because of the downside, but the fact that you're interested means there might be other discussions going on internally that I wasn't aware of. And like, oh, hey, you're trying to meet a similar need elsewhere. Like, let's schedule another meeting. Moving on to Power Pages specifically. Most of you are probably very familiar with what Power Pages is. I'm not going to kind of rehash what Microsoft's already published. But what I do want to highlight is what I already alluded to, which is that it is its own kind of core platform offering on the Power Platform, as opposed to an extension of Power Apps portals. So for many of you partners, I know a lot of people had very negative experiences with ADX portals or Power Apps portals over the last 10 years. And if you haven't looked, yet.
I bet there's maybe a few people on here who are completely not aware of that whole history and pedigree. Would you just cover it for us really quickly? That evolution is potentially pertinent, I think.
Oh, absolutely. So originally, it was a kind of boutique offering of, I believe, a Microsoft service provider called ADX Studios.
Yeah.
And so they produced a method. They realized that portals are becoming more and more customer requests, and they kind of built what became the model. They kind of built the underlying architecture and processes and functions that they could sell as a package to allow a external website to a Dataverse website. That was gaining so much steam and becoming such a common option that users were purchasing. They were eventually acquired by Microsoft, and ADX Portals was rebranded as Power Apps Portals. And Power Apps Portals was owned and maintained by Microsoft, but essentially from an architecture-wise, it was unchanged. There have been year after year. There was about, I believe, 5 years it was under this Power Apps Portals umbrella, and there was quality of life improvements, but foundational, it's not been a significant change. It was offered as a add-in package to your Power Apps license with certain pricing models. With Power Pages, they've kind of elevated from where it was to its own platform, but from a between us, Microsoft partners, it's pretty clear that it's still essentially the same ADX Studios architecture, functions, and processes that it always was. However, that's not going to remain true for long. So one exciting update that Microsoft has made is the Power Pages designer and developer experience integrates into the design studio, Visual Studio Code, which really does lower the bar on developers who are not as familiar with the platform to kind of quickly and efficiently make updates to JavaScript, update CSS theming, or even just HTML building, as opposed to how it was under the previous designer in tools. For any of you that are familiar with that, and as they're moving forward,
it's gotten a lot more low code from what I can see.
Yes,
it's truly dragging and dropping and using and using those low code tools that Microsoft is really starting to push.
It is, and it's still Power Portals, and so I don't want to overstate that it's not going to be as seamless as Webflow or Squarespace as far as like what you can do out of the box. It is every 6 months, the quality of life improvements and the quality of some of these designer tools are better and better, and so kind of beautiful future as far as what will be low code and no code. But to kind of bridge that gap, Microsoft's given the ability with kind of robust templates, like I alluded to before, that are rarely going to be a one-stop shop for you, but it has a lot of the more complicated features built in. So if you're looking at, well, I don't know how to do as you see here, that's a select appointment time. I don't know how to set up a calendar on a website and create, appointment records and activities in the CRM. Well, you could open the, schedule a financial institution appointment template, and you can see those functionalities already built. And then, so what we'll do is like, okay, that makes sense. Obviously, we're not banks and our architecture is a little different, but you could take those and export them as solutions into other environments, and you kind of build on top of. And so it is becoming more and more.
There's a lot of how-to in those templates.
Yes, absolutely. It's like Microsoft really, the templates themselves don't make sense as far as like how many after-school programs are trying to schedule like fun recess activities with children. So, as a developer, you're like, that was the use case you went with, Microsoft. But then you look at each one of these templates, even though the scenario, they call it, is a little bit strange, the functionality of each one of these is very powerful. And they are very universal. So please don't get too, you're like, oh, that doesn't fit what I need. I'm not an after school program. It's like, sure, but
they're
if you're not
trying
sure
to
how to
paint
build
you
it
into
yourself.
a corner. They're trying to show you, how you can make this work.
Exactly. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And so moving on, this is just a quick look at some of that, the designer experience. As Colin mentioned, it is low code. And it really is as an exciting way to kind of leverage developers and existing expertise compared to Power Apps portals that doesn't fight you as much. It still fights you a little when you try to kind of think too far outside of the box in extending the liquid language or HTML. It'll try to apply some auto formatting that doesn't quite match. It'll it's like, oh, you meant to close all of those brackets. I'm like, I didn't, but thank you. But that's getting better and better, and that's where every 6 months I think it's going to be a more pleasant experience. But it really is. If you haven't looked at portals at all for years because of a bad experience you had in the past, I really would challenge and encourage you to get back in and give it another chance. There's been enough improvement where it's absolutely worth giving a kind of a spend a weekend just getting in, building a trial template, and just seeing how much is done for you just by provisioning it into your existing environment. It really is impressive. So moving on to what's probably more interesting in a lot of ways is from theory to the software to our own experience. So this is always kind of difficult, and I'm sure you can all relate to it with NDAs and trying to respect customer privacy. So we've what we call in the Army sterilized this presentation, and we've tried to remove any attributable information. But we do believe we've left enough in to kind of get across the so what and encourage the conversation. But as Colin knows, I do have this particular client was months long and a lot of love and effort. And so I have a tendency to kind of really deep dive details. So more than ever, I'm going to hit what's important. And Colin, I'll be looking at you in the audience to help me understand what's interesting about the slide I'm presenting. So the scenario we're talking about is that there's a advertiser company who's looking to introduce a web portal application to interact better with their customers and allow the creation of marketing campaigns, as well as kind of getting updates on the status of marketing campaigns, where primarily they were a older player in the space, very well respected, but losing market share to some of these new flashier startups that just kind of came onto the scene with very seamless customer experiences, even though they didn't have the pedigree like our client had. So to address this, the kind of Adept Dynamics model is to have a very robust discovery and planning session. And so requirements gathering is nothing new, and I'm not going to imply that this is an Adept Dynamics specific function or something that we have the kind of market cornered on. However, our requirements gathering does tend to be more robust and involved than many of our peers. And why that is because of everything covered previously with the success of a portal and an overall implementation is truly understanding what is the business pain point being addressed, what's the proper tool to address it, and make sure we're not just trying to, they said they wanted a website, we're going to build them a website only to realize like, you know what, that makes sense, but it's just wasn't a good match, and that we usually end up building the correct solution down the road in a version 2 or 3. And then the clients are a little frustrated because they view it as sunk cost and not adventure learning. Like it feels as a developer of like, oh, good, we finally got you the perfect solution. Customers look back at the last 6 months as like, wow, I really wish we'd gotten here earlier. So we do have a very robust requirements gathering, and it's not just because we like to defend it every time we provide a client a scope of work. It'd be far easier to just get the requirements and jump into development. But time and time again, customer satisfaction and our ability to deliver quality results has been directly correlated to the quality of discovery and planning we put into the project. So what you're looking at here is the requirements gathering workshops for our client. As you see, they're blinded examples, but I think you can kind of tell how we set it up. So for this client, we had 2 separate tracks. Sometimes there's just one, sometimes there's more. Each one consisting of 3 to 4 workshops focused on their business concepts. So their hierarchy, who works for whom, how does information flow throughout the company, how's the approval for like changes to marketing strategies undergone. Okay, let's have a workshop with the approver, that kind of stakeholder interview we call it, where it's, hey, approver, what are you looking at? What is your decision process on whether or not to approve it? How can we make sure when you're prompted to approve or disapprove that you have all the information you need, provided in one step, so you can more efficiently approve this and kind of take you out as a blocker without giving up your level of control over the project. And so that we saw 8 here. I will admit the customer did not see the need for 8 one-hour presentations plus a 90-minute follow-up at the end. They thought it was more requirements gathering than needed because they'd already done a thorough internal requirements gathering process before they hired us. But by the end of it, we ended up actually executing, I believe it was 12 to 15 workshops, just because of when we're in that 1-hour workshop, there's a lot of good conversation, and it's like, hey, let's table it. Let's have a follow-on for that. And as stakeholders are brought into the workshops and the requirements gathering process, it reveals that executives might not always have the understanding they believe of how their business process flows, and it's important to stay on top of that. And it also may belie future goals and pain points that weren't communicated to those on the IT team who were sourcing the requirements. They took what they thought the process was, and they've been working with us for a month on it, only to get it in front of the customer and find out, well, that's true most of the time, but and we really try to build these workshops to get to that level of conversation of like, hey, has there ever been an example of when that didn't happen? And the number of times it's like, oh yes, that has happened. Oh, and it was really impactful, and we can improve it. And just the quality of product we can build for them that gets ahead of all that is fantastic, because inevitably you'll be in UAT, and then that one employee who's never invited to the meetings will show up and be like, hey, this doesn't account for this very specific use case that nobody else in the company knew I wrestled with Monday through Friday. And so we're really proud of this. It's not something that we wanted to start with, and we kind of dragged our feet as a company of really trying to stand our ground on a robust requirements gathering. But we've seen so many benefits. And when it comes to portal processes, one of the more recent changes is really doing more of the design, kind of prototyping of that kind of user experience and wireframing before we start development is paying dividends. Is even when we're very, very confident we know exactly what a client needs in the context of web portals, is somebody who didn't want a website, was on the fence about if a website was the best way to solve it, suddenly becomes a web designer when you deliver a product to them. And they suddenly have a lot of opinions of like, well, that doesn't make as much sense. It's like, well, but pushing up my glasses, I'm like, well, when you look at the wireframe we provide, it's exactly what you thought. And so with web design, there just tends to be most users may or may not have experience with CRM or complex software, but all users will have experience with websites. And so even though it's harder for them to articulate it, they know what's right when they see it, kind of phenomenon. And so just be prepared for that with web portal design. Perfect. So moving on to development, it's not going to pretend we have some secret sauce. We put all of our effort on the front end, and development, we try to make it as smooth as possible, adhering to that business requirements document that we put together as an output of requirements gathering. And then we try to be a good partner to our clients. As feedback comes in after development started, we're really trying to work with them to understand like the impact that changes during development have to the overall timeline, roadmap, and other priorities. And so what we'll usually do is, coming out of requirements gathering, we were hired for a scope for a very specific use case, and we'll go in with a BRD to development to meet that use case. But it's not unprecedented for us to leave with a business requirements document on what we're about to develop, plus a scope of work that's already drafted for version 1.1. Is yes, those are all good ideas. It is more than you wanted. Let's keep a running tally of all this feedback, and then we'll have that kind of heart to heart on, is it worth delaying, and like we could kind of add requirements forever, or is it better we deliver what was promised in phase one and we just work with you to kind of already build that scope and do the requirements gathering in parallel when possible, to kind of keep things on track. And that's led to much more positive results than trying to fulfill customers' wishes in the first phase. As Colin's using that language again, where we got in the way of customer data, customers get in the way of their own satisfaction when they just don't have the experience to understand, why can't we just add one more page? And then complexity comes from that, and the user training requirements. And so helping them just, this is what we're doing now, everything else in a bucket. Take them seriously, do the requirements gathering when it comes up, so they feel heard and they understand how that fits in a timeline. But be disciplined in being a good partner and not allowing them to expand the scope in such a way that's going to leave both parties feeling dissatisfied when you just try to do too much within the original scope and budget.
So we actually have a question a little bit about requirements gathering. Before we move too far on, I thought it might be a good idea to just throw that in here. So the question is, can you give some examples of what kinds of requirements gathering workshops you scope into requirements gathering? So maybe I don't quite, Sam, do you think you could clarify a little bit? We'd love to answer your question.
If you go back to the previous workshop slide, Colin, that would I'd be interested if perhaps I didn't really lay out exactly what this was capturing. But so we split our workshops and requirements gathering into a few different categories. Again, this is an example from a real client, not a template we used. But for this client, business concepts that really had nothing to do with the problem we were trying to solve. It was a complex enough organization that we just weren't familiar with. Advertisement is not something, it was the first client I'd worked with in that space with marketing. And so deliberate business concepts to understand what they do and how they function and structure was important in itself. From there, process deep dives is more the traditional, what you'd expect, which is like, okay, you want us to improve how customers submit requests for new ad campaigns. What is the current process? Like, let's walk through that. And so that right column in this example is something that's familiar. The left side is something that might get overlooked, but there's really synergy between those two. So when we put together the business requirements document, we get a lot of pushback from the reviewers of that doesn't feel like it meets our needs. And it empowers me as the project lead to have that conversation more as a peer of in their business, in their company, to advocate for the optimal solution instead of yes, sir, as soon as the executive who doesn't totally understand says, no, that's not how we do business here. And I could reference, well, from what I understand from your, head of marketing is that this is the process they've been using. He's like, I'll have to check with them. So we'll schedule a follow-on meeting after they've met internally. And sometimes marketing falls in line. It's like, okay, we were operating outside of our kind of left and right limits of what they're comfortable with. And they'd like us to be more disciplined with the formalized process that we developed 2 years ago. Good. But so oftentimes
it sounds like this process is much about making them communicate with each other about what is the truth.
Huge. Exactly. I don't know anything about marketing. All I listen for, like really what I'm doing as a consultant here is trying to look at their process, understand it deeply, not just the can I automate this, but like, okay, if I were an employee here, what is my job? What do I need? And so that way, when I'm looking at those process deep dives, I can kind of ask those questions. Kind of one requires the other. If I don't understand, they're going to walk through it. I'm going to take notes. I'm going to build that. If I understand their business first, when we get to the process deep dives, I can ask those questions of like, well, that's interesting. I thought that this guy was the approver. So how come you guys have already begun doing this step before it's gotten to approval? And sometimes they'll clarify for it. Oh, this is why. That makes sense. And other times it's like, oh, we don't know. That's just how the system's set up, And everyone's doing their part in the process with an assumption that the process was deliberate, but oftentimes it's just an artifact of an old system that they never considered. Is that step required? Or, hey, why don't you just go directly to the client at this step? And like those sorts of questions, impartial to what the answer is, but you'll get responses. And oftentimes you'll get responses and then someone else jumping in and being like, no, there's a compliance reason. We can't skip that. And they're like, well, I didn't know that. And then, well, hey, let's schedule a compliance workshop because previously we didn't know there was industry standards you were beholden to. So we want to make sure that what we're building meets your compliance. So that was a very poignant example for us of, as soon as people talk about that, it's like, I don't know how you didn't mention that you had, it's like anytime someone says HIPAA, suddenly as a database designer and engineer, you're like, oh, nobody mentioned HIPAA. Like, oh, we thought it was understood. You're like, oh, well, let's have a quick follow on. It's the sort of things that can completely impact customer satisfaction at the end when they discover that, no, your data model is not, HIPAA compliant, and it's going to cost X number of dollars more.
So it sounds like your process is about teasing out all the assumptions that can get you into trouble and make it explicit.
Is we always start with what were we hired to do, but at the end of the day, the solution we develop, as you see here, is the result of a rigorous requirements gathering process that, in cybersecurity, you have the zero trust kind of concept of like, sure, we need to work together, but we're going to move into everything with a zero trust of, external connections and move on that assumption. It's the same thing here is we're going to go on the zero trust that what you're asking for, with the customer. We're going to completely trust you that there's a problem, and we're going to respect your expertise and knowledge that you have a vision of what that solution looks like. And the closer we adhere to that, the easier it is to kind of get the scope signed. We can't just show up and say, here's a completely off the wall idea. But the reality is at the end of the day, the customer is not going to be satisfied that, like, hey, I was just following orders. You said you wanted a suboptimal solution. I gave you that. They want to be challenged and they want to understand what else is out there. And you're respectful. And if they tell you like, thank you, we're going to stick with this. Perfect. That's exactly what I want to get. So that way at the end of the process, when they're like, well, now that I'm seeing it, I'm not as happy with what we did. It is kind of clunky. And like, hey, like we talked about, that was going to be the impact of going this route. Here's where we recommend you could kind of make up for that. Now that we've already gone here, here's what version 2 could be to meet it. And it's always more comfortable as a consultant if we've kind of identified a potential problem that they encounter and then are dissatisfied with. Then we told them they're going to love it. They encounter a potential problem and they're dissatisfied because now that trust is gone. Because next time I tell them, perfect, we're going to build you the perfect solution without really considering where are all the ways you might be dissatisfied, then they feel like I overpromised. I say like, yes, I'll build you exactly this. Where really what they don't want is exactly this. What they want is the pain point resolved, within the time and budget they allocated.
So for the solution, I see where your team focused on the 4 supporting efforts with EDI, process automation, reporting, document management. Anything you wanted to cover on that? We're just starting to run shy of time.
Yes, and that's where I will leave it to you all to let me know. Otherwise, we focus on these areas just because those are the areas that in all cases require more time than you'd expect. Document management, for example, has a lot of complexity, data storage, ballooning costs. Is every email with every attachment can be stored in the Dataverse? You're all probably familiar with some of these problems. And with web portal design and projects, it's no different. And in fact, it can be more impacted because stuff like SharePoint integration, fantastic inside of the Dataverse for CRM. However, when you start extending that to Power Pages, you do run into some limitations with these kind of out of the box features of like, well, users want to be able to like, open and interact with it right there on the page, not have it automatically download. Well, SharePoint doesn't want to be a file hosting site, on a public facing website. So they have some controls that they've made it difficult to kind of change the default behavior of these. And so kind of understanding that these areas are going to take a thorough examination is never just hit the I believe button, that this is a step we've resolved. Always go in assuming that you're missing something and look for any of those assumptions. But in the infinite number of problems to solve, we try to just scope it down to like, hey, at the very least, make sure you consider these. And then based on the client you're facing, you can choose which other ones are relevant.
So let's quickly get. I want to get to the end of your case study because we've got a couple other things we need to cover, and we're just running short of time. So, what can you tell us how it all ended up?
Yeah, so things ended up positively. The client had they asked us to kind of add and extend, and so some of the things I was referencing elsewhere in the presentation about, they're always going to want one more page, they're always going to want one more functionality, and that's exactly what started happening. He's like, hey, how can we start? This was an internal portal for like, how do you manage your advertisement campaigns in many ways. But what they realized, like, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we could, improve our onboarding, if we could expose this to external customers that we don't have yet, and maybe use that as another sales pipeline. And hey, can we increase some like monitoring? So integrating Azure Monitor specifically was a big hit with, hey, I want to be able to track the user journey through the portal. And so you could see like, hey, how much time did partners spend on a given page of that portal before they moved to the next page? And where was that journey? Like before they submitted a help ticket through the support page, what were they doing immediately before? And so those kind of analytics that we were able to add on was fantastic for them. And it was fantastic for us to be able to be that partner. And none of that was envisioned going into that project.
That's awesome. So let's go very quickly through. Let's talk a little bit about if you're an MSP and you want to get good today, how would you recommend folks maybe collaborate with somebody like Adept?
Yeah, great question. So we offer kind of the full spectrum of partnerships where we are comfortable doing full white labeling, where the client's perspective, we're employees in your shop. We've leveraged white labeling internally. Again, as mentioned about, we know our strengths and we know where our gaps are. And if we have a gap, rather than tell a client we have a gap, it's like, oh, interesting. Let's set up a call with our expert in that respect, who we like to work with. And then he would be in that presentation handling specifically some of the nuances of web design, for example, where we're not as strong. And it makes us look like we have more capacity than we otherwise would need, because this is a niche client case. And so why hire someone for something we only do once a week? If using us as an example, if you don't have many clients that need portals, you're not that interested in it. When you run into that one who needs a portal, you could bring us in and white label it. We're comfortable with that. You could alternatively pass them directly to us, that kind of referral, where we're going to work internally between ourselves and yourself, or through Sherweb partners facilitating to figure out, hey, this is Adept Dynamics. They specialize in this sort of thing. We've worked with them in the past. We'd love to kind of refer you to them so they can help you address this concern. If it's just overall completely separate from what you're doing, and then there's that hybrid, that kind of project work where they know we're not your employees, they know we're partners, but we will, you can still be in charge of the project management. You could be doing the overall development while we just focus on the portal portion of a project. So really is whatever you're comfortable with, whatever your need is, we can likely work something out to provide that.
Cool. And just to get through here, so let's talk a little bit about. We can talk a little bit about pricing. Obviously, there's a ton of variables, but you know, one of the biggest things on an ongoing basis for Power Pages is just how much you're using it, how many active users you have, whether that's internal or external, anonymous or authenticated. So just to give everybody a sense, it's kind of it's part of Microsoft's trend of moving in the direction with some of these services of pay for what you use. So that's the general principle on Power Pages from a licensing point of view. It's how many monthly active users you're dealing with typically. So I just thought I'd throw that out there too. But obviously, there's a bunch of other factors.
Absolutely. And one thing to throw on there, it's a nuance that's changed, is monthly active users for Power Pages is described as monthly active users. So Doug Gain logs in once that month. That's the same monthly average user, the same MAU throughout it. Previously, like 6 months ago, very recently, it was not that model. If Doug logged in 24 hours apart, then I was a separate user, essentially, from the authenticated view.
Daily logins.
Yes, and that really changed the viable use cases where portals can fit, which again is part of the impetus of this meeting. Is when it makes sense for a portal is different, specifically because of the licensing model. Thank you, Colin.
Yeah, and you're not being punished anymore for high volume usage, right? It's number of users versus the frequency with which they log on and access your data. So you're not kind of being punished for your own success quite as much.
Yeah, and it does scale interesting. It's still Microsoft licensing, so it's not cut and dry, but it's far cry from where it was a year ago.
Yeah, we can. And anybody has questions, we at Sherweb can definitely help. It's not easy to understand. We can help walk you through it, although it's gotten easy.
Excellent. So I guess I could continue, or at this point, I would love to use the last minute if there's any hot question or anything else you'd like to close out from an administrative portion.
Yeah, actually, I'd love to just throw you a question that I got here. If folks are interested in getting into this business, what kind of ramp up time are they looking at to start finding and working on portal projects? Like, is this a whole different go to market in your opinion?
So I would say, like everything else, it depends. To try to skip through the different factors, it is a quick go to market for very specific use cases. So like we talked about, if there's a template that already meets your use case, if you're already very experienced with Dynamics client services, I'm confident that you could take the template portal, integrate the kind of really robust, premium client services features, and you can get something functional quickly. Where you're going to run into issues, and it's a much longer ramp up time, longer training, is how to style it and brand it in such a way that it fits with their existing, very expensive websites they have already on their domain, and making your portal fit as part of their overall brand is where it becomes more difficult. But if you have a client that's relatively smaller, has a niche use case, like I don't care if it's pretty, I need it to work, then you could probably pick it up faster than you'd assume by just trial and error. And after several months, you could probably be confident communicating to a client like, yes, I was able to sandbox this for you. Here's how it's set up. In the out of the box, the great tutorials from Microsoft about how to configure Azure Active Directory or B2C, business to customer for that authentication. And it's a intuitive way to work, but I don't want to kind of overpromise to get to the kind of level that enterprise expects. We're still expanding and improving client to client with just as web design changes. Bootstrap 5's coming out for Power Pages over the summer, hopefully, which is going to be huge from Bootstrap 3. And so, like, as these things change, the familiarity in order to leverage the portal is going to change with it.
So I would recommend get in touch with your AM. If you have my information, get in touch with me. Get in touch with Sherweb, and we would love to connect you with Adept to help you explore these opportunities in your client book. It's not necessarily a whole new go-to-market. Often these use cases are just sitting there waiting to be filled, and sometimes it's just a matter of education. So that's where I'll leave it. I'll thank everybody who's still on for joining us. We've got a couple minutes over. We really appreciate having you here today. If you've got any additional questions, please feel free to reach out. We're going to follow up. With all the attendees, and just let us know if you've got additional questions, and we'd love to continue the conversation.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Thank you all for
Thanks,
the time.
everybody. Thank you so much, Doug, for sharing your stories and all of your expertise on this. I think it's a really exciting use case, and I hope folks are going to take advantage of all that's out there.
Awesome.